Thank you very much, Cahirlock. Do I have a time limit in responding?
Yeah, 4 minutes, Senator.
Oh, God. Right. Okay, well, first of all, could I say that I think your comments, Minister, that no party has a monopoly on the wisdom in relation to housing is a very appropriate one. And numerous governments over many, many years have made very positive advances in relation to housing. In fact, the very first Commonwealth government in 1922 introduced the £1 million plan, which was the first, I suppose, extensive social housing programme of the Free State. And indeed, you know, subsequent Fianna Fáil governments introduced very significant social housing programmes. And indeed, it was Bobby Malloy who set in place the Commission on the Private Rented Sector, a Fianna Fáil government that brought in the 2004 legislation, a Fianna Fáil government that brought in the Planning and Development Act, and indeed brought in the improved rental standards in their term of government. And indeed, this government, I think, has progressed a lot of those strategies very significantly. And there's been a huge commitment to bringing these strategies forward. Mistakes have been made, there's no doubt about that. I think, you know, going back as far as 1973, I think it was a coalition government that started to abolish rates for the provision of local authority housing, and it was a Fianna Fáil government in 1977 that finished that programme, which effectively made local authorities dependent on central government for all of their housing funding, and we've paid a big price for that. I just wanted to refer to your comments and to welcome a number of them. First of all, in relation to the introduction of the deposit protection scheme, I very much welcome that, and as I've said earlier, a lot of tenants have been made homeless or have had to remain in unsuitable accommodation because they haven't been able to get their deposits back. I also welcome your comments in relation to the HAP scheme. It is long overdue that the issue of social housing and social housing provision through other supports was brought under the aegis of one department, and I think one of my colleagues already mentioned that. In relation to your comments on standards, again, I very much welcome your commitment, I guess, for want of a better word, at least I'm taking it as a commitment, to examine the feasibility of introducing a certification system. I've long believed that that is the best way to ensure that we have appropriate standards in the rented sector. In relation to the issue of homelessness, it has been a very important development that we are ring-fencing a supply of accommodation for people coming out of homeless services. I've been involved in the area of homelessness for many, many years, and one of the major problems has been for people coming out of homelessness to be able to access social housing supports. And that is the way to end long-term homelessness. I mean, I have to say, I don't agree with Father McFerry. I fully respect him as a colleague, but I do believe the Housing First approach and the measures that this government have taken to put the housing-led approach on the agenda is the way to deal with homelessness. And the fact that we have committed in the Dublin region half of all social housing allocations to go towards people in homeless services and in Cork, I think that is the way that long-term homelessness will be resolved. And it has taken many, many years to come to that position. In relation to rising rents, now, I'm taking your comments in a positive way, that you are prepared to examine all measures to deal with this situation, including examining the issue of rent certainty. Now, I think it's very important to distinguish the language here. Rent control is categorically unconstitutional. It was deemed to be unconstitutional in 1981. I am not referring to rent control. I am referring to a modern day version of that, which is prevalent in nearly every developed European country where they have a significant rental sector, which is about limiting the extent of increases in rents to a reasonable proportion. Nobody is suggesting landlords are not entitled to a reasonable return on their investment, but it has been my experience, looking at the Irish housing sector over very many, many years, that we have engaged in boom and bust cycles that are no good for anybody, and regulating the level of rent increases and, incidentally, decreases will help to stabilise the overall housing market generally. I did research in 2003 into the idea of investment by institutions in the rented market, and the conclusion was they wanted to see better regulation, and they wanted to have some security over rental yield. And I do honestly believe that regulating rent increases is the way to go in that regard. A comment was made to me quite recently by somebody who was involved in the Commission on the Rental Sector as to why the legislation at the time regulated rent increases only for a period of 1 year. The reason at the time was nothing other than the fact that the standard in the market at the time were 1-year leases. Had the standard been 2 or 3 year leases, we would have had 2 or 3 year rent certainty models. There is no reason why we cannot revisit this. I want to thank all of the colleagues who contributed to this debate. I have very extensive notes, and if I had the time, I would respond. But I just want to make one comment, or two, if you don't mind, in relation to the counter motions. I very much, understand the spirit in which they've been put forward. But I do think we are moving towards a new system of social housing provision, where you're not looking at a quantum of 2.2 billion. You are basically looking at something to lever further investment. I'm personally sitting on the Dublin City Council Housing SPC, and I'm aware that Dublin City Council have put out into the market for expressions of interest, where Dublin City Council puts up the land and they're looking for partners to augment their investment. And that is the way forward. In fact, that's what we're having at the moment in Europe with the Juncker plan. I want to see a new model of social housing provision. The old model does not work. It's already been alluded to by Senator Barrett. It doesn't pay for itself. It is not the way to go forward. We gave houses away back in the 1980s because they cost more to manage and maintain than we were actually able to deliver them for. So, in terms of the counter motion, I am concluding. In terms of the counter motion, I think I accept the point that you're bringing forward. I think that the Minister has dealt with that to some extent. And in relation to Senator Crockwell's motion, he knows my commitment to rent regulation. But I have to accept the Minister's commitment that he is prepared to examine every measure. I personally am committed to making sure that he does. Thank you very much, Cathal.